Good morning and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. I still remember the Holocaust Museum I visited when I was in Israel. Even more poignantly, I remember the other building off to the side that was the memorial to the children who were killed during the Nazi regime. Inside there were a few candles lit behind some glass, but the rest of the building was all glass and reflective surfaces inside, so that those 5 or 6 candles were reflected over and over until it looked like you were inside a building of stars with lights surrounding you. Each light represented a child who had died, and as I stared in hushed silence, the speaker overhead simply read the names of the children who had died, and it took 3 days to make it through the list. As I exited the building, our guide had us look over the hills just outside. These were the hills of Ramah, he told us, hearkening back to the scripture from Jeremiah 31 that describes a voice crying out in Ramah as Rachel, the wife of Jacob, weeps for her children. Some years ago, there was a popular book out entitled Bad Girls of the Bible, and in the book it told the stories of some of the women in the Bible who had not been stellar examples of character or of faith. Well, borrowing that idea a little bit, our focus this week will be on bad guys of the Gospels. We will look at some of the bad guys in the gospel story and learn more about them, suggest some motives, and reflect on their history and deeds. Today our focus is on Herod the Great, and he did, in fact, have some greatness about him. There are also some really bad things about him, too. Let's clear up some confusion right away. This is not the King Herod who is part of the story of Jesus' crucifixion. The Herod that was around for Jesus' ministry, suffering, and death is Herod Antipas, and we will consider him tomorrow. Herod Antipas was one of the sons of Herod the Great, who is mentioned in the Gospels as part of the story of Jesus' birth. Herod the Great ruled in Judea, but in his day there were many who questioned his right to be on the throne. The whole area had been conquered by Rome, and Julius Caesar appointed Herod to be the king over the region, although he was a vassal ruling on behalf of Rome. But worse, technically, Herod wasn't a Jew. His family had gained influence with Rome, but he was in fact from a region just to the south called Idumea. Many Idumeans adopted the Jewish faith, but it's not clear whether Herod did or not. More about that a bit later. In order to get the throne, he ended up marrying a woman named Miriamne. The only thing was that he already had a wife named Doris and a son by her. Here we see one of the defining characteristics of Herod the Great. He put Doris and her son away, banishing them from him. Herod the Great treated all his family this way. He was very insecure on the throne, so Herod sought to quell any threat, meaning that he killed several of his sons, and later on, even Miriamne herself. And that brings us to the central issue about King Herod the Great. You see, when the wise men search for the baby Jesus, the first place they go is to Jerusalem, to the palace, where you might expect the king to be born. They come into the presence of King Herod and ask exactly the wrong question to this paranoid king. Where is the one who is born King of the Jews? Hidden in that question is an implied threat to King Herod. The way Herod hears the question is, "You are not the legitimate king of Israel, so where is the one who has been born to this title?" Eventually, Herod sends him to Bethlehem, and when the wise men don't return with news, Herod slaughters all the babies in Bethlehem who were aged 2 and under to make sure he had the threat to his throne wiped away. Once more, the voice cried out in Ramah, weeping over the children. Herod the Great is called great because of his skill with building projects. Under his leadership, the second temple was constructed, and the Temple Mount was expanded. The Western Wall, or Wailing Wall, you see Jews praying at today, is a retaining wall for the expanded Temple Mount that Herod built, and is the last part standing. Part of the wall isn't visible, but as they have excavated, they have found one stone up in the wall that is so large and heavy we don't even have a crane today that can lift it. How did Herod get it halfway up his wall? No one knows. Herod also built fortresses like Masada, and also one inside a man-made mountain, which was called the Herodium. An interesting side note is that while he wasn't very good at it and drowned people who did it with him, Herod liked to swim. At the side of the Herodium, that man-made mountain, Herod had a swimming pool built, which is almost twice the size of modern Olympic-sized pools. Ancient historian Josephus recorded that Herod was so deeply concerned that no one would mourn his death that he commanded a large group of distinguished men to come to Jericho, and he gave an order that they should be killed at the time of his death so that the displays of grief that he craved would take place. It appears that his wishes were not carried out. Finally, I need to mention the temple steps. The steps to the Temple Mount that Herod built weren't like normal steps, and rather they were unevenly spaced, with some wider than others, some higher than others, all the way up to the temple. Scholars pondered how a man who could oversee all the marvels that he built couldn't seem to build a simple staircase. Then they realized that walking up those steps, you had to pay attention. With every adjustment to your stride, you had to remind yourself, I'm going to the temple to worship. Over and over, with every step, you thought about it until by the time you were there, you were focused and ready and prepared to worship. Like most of us, Herod the Great was a complex person, made up of both good and bad. We don't celebrate him today. We celebrate Jesus, the one who was born to be our King. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.